Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to see you all. I can't say I meet you all, but I'm delighted to be here with you and very honored to be asked. You know that there were many ways that Jews survived the war. Some were unfortunately taken to camps, and if they were lucky, they survived. Others did it another way. We never went to camps. We survived in hiding, and I will tell you my story. It starts in Driesen, a little village in Germany near the Polish border, southwest of Berlin. And I always start by thanking the people who saved us during the war and who helped us survive. Non-Jewish people who helped us and to whom I'm forever grateful, Placereau especially. My grandfather was a jeweler. He had his own shop in that little village. He went through the First World War as a good German citizen. Here you see my grandparents on the left top, my mother on the right, Charlotte, and her younger brother, Alfred. I only had one uncle, and of course his wife eventually, because my mother only had one brother, and my father was the only child who survived of 4 that his mother bore. So the first miracle of my life was that my father survived out of 4 children, so that I'm here today. My life is just full of miracles. My mother grew up with a lot of anti-Semitism. She was born in 1910. By 1915, she decided she wanted to become a doctor because my grandmother was very ill, and she said, I want to take care of my mom. So she did everything, took Latin and Greek, and did everything she needed to do to be accepted at the medical school in Berlin, which she went to in 1928. She met my father in 1930. He was already a full-fledged working patent attorney. This is their engagement picture on the right, and you see my uncle on the left with his new wife. My parents got married in 1931, and I was promptly born in May of 1932, which makes me 92, so you don't have to do your math. Here we go. This is me. So my mother was still a student, even though she was married. My father was earning a living, and my grandparents took care of me. So my father was lucky to have a colleague in Paris, another patent attorney, a non-Jewish guy, Monsieur Placereau, who invited my father by letter saying, if things become difficult in Germany, why don't you come over to Paris and work with us in our office? And my father had the opportunity and also the wisdom to take it. And by September of 1933, my father was already in Paris. My mother stayed in Berlin as a student, but on October 3rd, she received this letter in October, dated October 3rd, from the university saying, you are hereby excluded from further studies at the Berlin University for your Marxist activities. She was not a Marxist, she was not interested in politics, she just wanted to become a doctor. But she had to leave along with all the doctors, professors, all the Jews of the hospital and the university. They were all given 20 minutes to empty their lockers and leave. And they were lucky that they were told to leave. They should have left Germany as well, and many unfortunately didn't. So my mother packed up the furniture with me, and we went to France, to Paris. There I am, 18 months old in Paris, and you see on the top the building in Berlin where my father came from, where he worked. So what happened to my uncle? He was an apprentice in an agricultural place where they learned agriculture with the latest machinery available of the day. They wanted to go to the British Mandate of Palestine because they wanted to escape Germany. And in November of 1933, his boss, as an apprentice, his boss received a letter saying, after our last conversation with you in mid-October, I told you to dismiss your apprentice, the 21-year-old Jew, in a few weeks. Now I have been informed that you haven't done so. It is unacceptable that a Jew should now be able to work on a farm while our German workers are suffering from need and hunger as they are unable to find food in their own country. You are here with order to dismiss this Jew, or else I will have to take more drastic measures against you. Heil Hitler. This is the letter that cost my uncle his apprenticeship. So he took his young bride and they went to that British Mandate of Palestine. And you see they must have lived in white tents because that's where they are pictured in front of. And I want you to see what the country was like in the top, the right and the bottom. There was not even a shrub there, not a tree, it's all just soil. And the only mode of transportation was a donkey-drawn cart for people and luggage. So we lived in France in a big apartment building in the immediate suburbs of Paris. My mother had a second child, a brother for me, for my birthday in 35. And then she got pregnant again, and all her friends said, are you crazy to bring another child into the world? What are you going to do? The war is about to start. And my parents said, look, we have 2 children, we'll have to do whatever we can. So we'll do the same with 3. And I am so fortunate to still have 2 younger brothers, 85 and 89, still living in Paris. All the friends of my parents who came out of Germany as refugees had only 1 child, if they had any. So I'm very lucky that my parents had 2 children. So we moved into this villa in the further suburbs of Paris to have more room. And my father sent my jeweler grandfather and his wife tickets to Shanghai, to board a ship out of Marseille to Shanghai, to China. China was the only country at that time who was willing to accept Jewish refugees from Europe. So my father was told that with those tickets they would be able to go into France, take the train to Marseille and pick up the ship in March of 1939. My grandmother sent my mother 2 trunks full of silver that my grandfather saved and my mother saved it by absolute miracle. I cannot tell you all the details, but it was a miracle that we saved all of this. So my grandparents were not able to enter France. They found their way to Italy and they were onto a little illegal boat to that mandate place. They had a horrific trip of 6 weeks where they had to give all the things they possessed just to get a piece of bread and a glass of water. They were put in a camp in Cyprus. They came back to the land. They were shooed away by the British. It was just horrendous. Anyway, they made it finally through the water, and there's my grandmother pictured on a publication that must have appeared in the country there in 1939. So my other grandparents appeared on our doorsteps of our villa in August of 1939. I don't know how they left Germany or how they got into France, but they came to live with us, and my grandfather introduced me to joke telling, which I've done since. So France is now being, in 1940, invaded from the north by the Germans. We will go from Paris down to a castle about 150 miles south of Paris. Then we would try to go to Lyon. We still is trying to escape meeting any Germans. And we will end up in a little village in this area here, close to Grenoble, this area. This is a plateau about 3,000 feet above sea level, where we will end up in a little village. So my father in 1940 was told by his boss, Monsieur Placereau, I want you to leave Paris. I don't want you to be found by the Germans. and he told several of other people of his office to go with him to that little castle that I told you. And there they are pictured in the summer of 1940, and there's my father in the back, the tall guy in the back. I went last year with some of my family. We retraced all the steps we took in France, and we found the castle. There it is, yet last year. It's completely abandoned and empty, but you can see that it's the 3 windows and the tower are the same here. And my father had his office desk and his office desk chair in a veranda, which we found as well, the outside and the inside where he had his office with a glass roof. And during one of the many bombardments, when we heard the sirens, we would run into the basement. When we came back one day out of the basement, we found that a big piece of a bomb had come through the roof of that veranda and went straight through my father's desk chair. Had he stayed at his desk, he would have been killed instantly. So many miracles that are incredible in my life and that I'm grateful for. So my grandfather in the villa had died of pneumonia suddenly, and my mother was left with the baby and my grandmother, and she came to this border between the 2 zones, the occupied zone by the Germans and the free zone. And when she came, oh, and I forgot to say that we left that castle to go to Lyon after a few months, and my father rented an apartment on the top of a big carpentry shop in the suburbs of Lyon. And then my mother came to that border, and she was told by the unpleasant French official, you and the baby, you can go, the old woman stays behind. Ah, no, said my mother, I'm not going to leave her behind. If you don't let her through, you force me and the baby to stay with her, and if anything happens to you, and to us, it will be on your conscience for the rest of your life. And she made such a fuss, and she got so excited and red and everything that he finally had enough, and he said, okay, just F off. So that's how my mother is the heroine of my story. She was a very strong woman. Difficult mother too. So we lived in Lyon for a year, and here you see us. We lived from 41 to 42, and we are now in 1942, 10, 7, and 3. And my mother said, we have to put the children somewhere else because the Germans are everywhere. And this is Lyon here with the Saône River and the Rhône River. We were up here in Caluire, and the 2 rivers merge in the south. So my mother went to that area that I showed you, southwest of Grenoble, in that mountainous area where there were lots of houses for children, a pension d'enfants, if you know French, that were like boarding schools in the winter and spring, and then luxury summer camp for kids when the parents wanted to take a vacation without the kids. So my mother went to 30 of those places, and they were all full to capacity, which goes to show that they were not the only parents who wanted to shield their children by putting them somewhere else. And so she went to 30 of those, they were all full, and in full desperation, she arrived in Autran, in Clairefontaine, in 1942. And there you see Madame Montonex, who was willing to take the 3 Jewish children. I'm standing next to her, there's my brother Ernest, and Raymond is somewhere else, I don't know. He was maybe taking a nap or a bath. He didn't make to the picture. I had a romance going with the son of Madame Montonex. He was 11, I was 10, and we were guarding the cows together. I would meet him again 70 years later without having ever seen him in between. There came a time when my parents also came to Autran. This is the only picture I have of my parents and my family during the war. In 1943, we are 11, 8, and 4. And my father rented the upstairs of this yellow house in the middle. This upstairs was ours. And we had our landlord and landlady, Monsieur and Madame Raveau, with their 2 daughters. And when my mother came to the kitchen, she found she didn't have enough tools to cook. So she said, I have to go back to Lyon to our apartment to get a few things. And my father was really anxious, but she went. And she arrived at the station. She took a tramway up along the Rhône River. She got off here, ran up the hill, got things out of her kitchen, was having tea with her landlady, and suddenly she looked at her watch and she said, oh my God, I can't miss my train. She ran down the hill again, and was happy to get onto a tramway that left every 20 minutes, and there it was about to leave. On the other side of the Rhône River, she ran across this bridge for pedestrians and traffic. There's the station. She arrived huffing and puffing on the platform as the guy was whistling. She jumped on the train, and the train then slowly went on its own way across the Rhône the other way. She ran this way, and the train went this way slowly, and she had time to look out the window, and she saw that 15 minutes after she had run over that bridge 15 minutes before. By then, the Germans had cordoned off both sides of the bridge and were asking for papers. My mother was a French citizen by then, but she was Charlotte Gutmann, born in Germany, and she would have been toast. She would have been picked up immediately, either as a Jewish person or as a resistance person with all the stuff she was carrying. So she escaped to be caught by 15 minutes. Last year, you see, I'm standing on that bridge. She ran this way, and there you see the railway bridge. That from where she looked at that bridge, and she saw that all traffic had been stopped. And we also found out that the Nazi headquarters were just a hop and a skip from the bridge. So I figured that they often had raffles over that bridge to pick up people who wanted to escape to the station. So we came to Autran in that yellow house. It's a beautiful valley with low mountains, full of mountains. So when we had many alerts, the Germans are coming from the plain, from Grenoble up the mountain, we were able to run into the woods. My father had found 3 kind farmers who were willing to take each one of us in case if my parents had time to take us, in case my parents may have to stay in the forest overnight. We didn't know. But we had many false alerts. The alerts were very interesting. We didn't have telephones. We had to go to the post office to make a phone call. So the first post office down in the valley that saw that the Germans were trying to come up the road with their heavy equipment would call the next post office up the hill, that calls the next post office, that calls the next post office. And from each post office immediately 2 people would run, one to the bakery, one to the hotel, and from the bakery and the hotel 2 people would run, etc., etc. Within 5 or 10 minutes, everybody who had to run had time to run into the forest. We were 2,000 people living in Autran, which had 1,000 inhabitants before the war. So half the population was in hiding in Autran. My father, on his bike, did the round of all the farmers 3 times a week to get a piece of bread here, some bread here, a glass of milk, an egg somewhere else, a potato somewhere else, until he had enough, and we survived. Monsieur Placereau, to whom I'm terribly grateful to this day, made sure for my father to be able to work part-time so he could be paid part-time. A secretary would come from Lyon to Grenoble once a week. My father would meet her down from Autran, and they would exchange files so that he could work part-time. Then the Allies came, and we were so happy. We went on a picnic on the top of the mountain, and we saw the planes. Sorry, you saw the planes, right? German planes, and they started bombing our valley. So we ran down the hill, and my father vowed, if I am to die, I will die with a weapon in my hand. And he and his male friends, who had followed us, also refugees, from Paris to Lyon to Autran. They all went to the resistance forces nearby on the same plateau. And they left the women and children to fend for themselves. And then the Germans really came to Autran. And the next day, Monsieur Raveau called my mother from downstairs and said, "Madame, can you please come and help me?" And my mother came down the stairs to meet two Nazis on the doorstep. And he said, "What do they want? I don't know German, they don't know French." So she spoke with a very broken German. Can you imagine? I can't imagine her fear, leaving 3 children upstairs. She took her worst possible German, just putting a few German words aligned with a French accent. And she spoke to them like that, with very broken German. And she said they want a room in the house to sleep and they want to be fed in the house. So Monsieur Raveau said, we will feed them, my wife and I. Madame, why don't you give your bedroom, since your husband is away, I'll give you a cot to take to the attic. So for 2 weeks that the Germans stayed in our house, they slept next to the 3 Jewish children, with my mother at the attic window, never sleeping for 2 weeks, because she had no news from my father, and she thought that if by chance he was coming home in the middle of the night, he would throw a pebble against the bedroom window to alert her to come downstairs to unlock the door for him. So she never slept. I don't know how she did it. Fortunately, the Germans left in a hurry because it was already August 1944. They knew they were losing the war, and they didn't have time to kill the inhabitants of the house and burn the house down like they always did when they stayed somewhere. And those were particularly nice Germans, I guess. I think they were tired of the war. Then my mother received a little paper that sent her on a trip, on a bicycle trip, and she had a God-sent accident trying to go meet my father with his clothes on the bicycle, and she found out that her rental bike didn't have, her brakes didn't work, and she then fell in a hairpin curve, and her journey was over, and that was absolutely God-sent. Because had she continued her journey, she would have gone straight into all the German armies that were still around Grenoble, where they had killed all the inhabitants in all the villages, from the newborn babies to the centenarians. They had destroyed all the homes, killed the surgeons in the caves who were operating on wounded people. It was a massacred area, and thank God my mother was kept by God from going further. In the fall of 1944, we went back to Lyon, which was being liberated. I decided, I came out of the war without being too traumatized. My parents did really their utmost to keep our life as normal as possible for us kids. I was very immature for my age, even at 12 in 1944. And we took it in our stride, you know. We were in danger, but it's my parents who took all the brunt of the anxiety. They never heard about what happened in the concentration camps until the war was over. So that was also miraculous that they didn't know. They didn't know anything about that. They had enough to deal with as is. So I decided I wanted to go live in Israel. And I became a nurse. I met my husband. It was love at first sight, like you wouldn't believe. We got married in 5 weeks, and I never looked back. We went to Oxford first for 2 years of studies. We went then to Uganda for 3 years, where my husband did research towards his PhD. Back to Oxford. By then we had 3 children. To finish the PhD, then he was offered an assistant professorship in Berkeley. And $7,000 was the annual salary for an assistant professor in Berkeley in 1963, which is interesting. The tumultuous 60s, by 1970 we went to Canada, and he taught for 18 years in Canada at Brock University, St. Catharines, Ontario. until he sadly died of leukemia at the age of 55. So in 1956 I came, in 1989 I came to this area, and this is where I've lived the longest in my life. I had to make a new life for myself, whether I wanted it or not. And my life changed when I went on a March of the Living for the first time, and this has become my purpose to speak now. It's a life-changing trip for Jewish students in 12th grade before they graduate from high school. We go for a week to Poland, then a week to Israel. And the week in Poland is more informative than if you sit for 2 years on a university bench learning about the Holocaust and watching movies. It's 1 week in Poland is life-changing. This map in Auschwitz also showed me these are all the railways taking the cattle cars with Jews to Auschwitz, and one of the departure places is Lyon. And when I saw that, I stood there the first time I saw it for 10 minutes. I couldn't believe how close we were if we had been taken by the Germans. Monsieur and Madame Montonex of Clairefontaine have been inscribed as righteous among the nations in Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Israel. And we found Jean Montonex, the guy of 11, when I was 10, and we guarded the cows together. We found him 70 years later in southern France. He was already dying of lung cancer. He died a few months after we saw him, and I will always remember the loving hug he gave me. He never forgot our little guarding the cows. We went back to Autran last year, and this is the yellow house now with a roundabout. And you remember the daughters of our landlord and landlady are now those two ladies in 2012. And this lady is now here, and she is 101. And we had lunch with them last year, and we keep in touch through Facebook. And we really have an unbreakable bond because of the difficult times we had. I grew up with hatred of everything German, which was finally put to rest when I met two non-Jewish German women who have spent their life working for Jewish causes and volunteering. And they put those stumbling stones in the sidewalks in front of homes and shops from which the Jews were taken to their death. And I was invited by one of them back to Berlin. So 80 years after I left as a tiny baby child, I went back to Germany for the first time. And she took me to see the university where my mother studied and the building where my father worked. And as I was walking with her, a ray of sunlight suddenly hit this stumbling stone here. And I looked at it, and you have to bend or kneel to read it because it's so small, so you pay homage at the same time. And here it says, here worked attorney Dr. Julius Blumenthal, born 1900, or taken prisoner Sachsenhausen, murdered on the 3rd of December 1942. He was my father's best friend, to whom he said in 1933 when he left, you should leave also. And Julius said, no, this will pass. And then we went back to Dresden, where my mother grew up. And you see, now it's in Poland. It's called Dresdenko. Same place, a little bit greener. Here are the two ladies from Germany who are my friends now. Very wonderful women. My father died in 1974 of massive coronary. My mother in 2001 of Alzheimer's. I am blessed with 3 children and 6 grandchildren who are now in their 30s. And I have 10 great-grandchildren. The last one is 8 days old. Now there are only 7 on the picture because it's an old picture. The last one is 8 days old. And these 3 little ones, these are this is my oldest granddaughter here. They live in Jerusalem. And it is important to think that their parents now in Jerusalem are going or have gone through the awful anxiety with their 3 children that my parents experienced with their 3 children 80 years ago. I thank you for your patience and listening.